Good to see you. It's John Develot, the Ask for Freedom Initiative, live again. And how is the Freedom family doing this morning? Yes. Talking about what we're probably going to be talking about most of the year here, since we have our 2026 goal of executing 100 new offshore generational wealth trusts. We are going to be spending a whole lot of time talking about generational wealth, and not just the easy parts, but the hard parts. So, today, one of the hard parts of generational wealth, habitus. Habitus. We're going to get into that today, figure out what it is, why it matters. All of these things, for our clients specifically, are broken down into their family constitution. But not all clients are constitutional clients. Some clients are just getting trust deeds designed on the generational wealth side and either already have a family constitution or don't understand its incredible importance. So sometimes families are building generational wealth and they are lacking these kind of fundamental building blocks. And it's not even just sometimes, it's actually statistically most of the time, right? So think about that for a minute. Most of the families making the financial sacrifice are not disciplining themselves and making a sacrifice in discipline that allows their family to become dynastic and actually perpetuate their trusts and their family structures throughout multiple generations. So that's pretty crazy because you're already talking, if you think about it, you're already talking about maybe 10%, 10% of people that got it together enough to even, walk down this road. And then of that 10%, 75% only do the easy part. Right? So, incredibly telling, I suppose, of human nature. But there are a bunch of factors that we typically look into, that we've looked into over the course of, the the last decade or so, decade and a half or so. And we've already spoken about, and you'll hear me speak about multiple times, the most important factor typically in, all of the family constitutions that are done are conflict resolution. That's number one, right? That has to be written in there. It has to be written well, and it has to be written to match your family or your idea of what your family will be for those folks who are actually developing a family constitution before they have a family. I actually think that's sometimes the strongest method by which to do it, because sometimes when we develop a constitution with a family, then it becomes like a almost like a holy document. It's now enshrined because 20 people sat around a table and figured out that this is, what they agreed upon, right? So then there becomes this reverence to the document where people don't want to change it, and if you do change it, it's like you slighted this person because that was their idea, and the blah 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 blah. Typically, people who are generating an outline for their family, right, which would of course become a branch of, whatever family they already exist in. Typically, when that happens, the document is not enshrined as much as when it doesn't happen. And so from there are yearly updates. And as they learn things, and as they, include a partner, and as they, have children and all of that, it's much easier for them to update that document and to update, that family constitution, until they got it to a place where they want it, which sometimes doesn't even happen until the second generation. Sometimes the patriarch or matriarch doesn't even get it right before they pass on. But the framework is there, and that's what really matters, is that the framework is there, right? So those are the kind of observations that we've seen over the years as when it comes to the framers of the family constitution, right? If there's a bunch of them involved, it becomes a harder document to change, which then starts pushing them into that 75% that fail in generation one. And when it's one person, typically that person is like considered the black sheep by the rest of the family, and they just decide to break off and create their own kind of independent branch of the family, and then make sure that their branch of the family has everything that the family they came from is unwilling to provide, and then that person and their constitution is way more malleable and has a much higher success rate, in our professional opinion over the years. So those are the two. Those are really the two categories of folks that are creating not a generational wealth plan, but a family constitution. There's either people who have a large family and the family's all about it, which can be great, but then we have to remind them during the process that it's not a holy document. It can be changed, so on and so forth. And as long as they grasp that concept, it's all good. But there are always people who are impressed with themselves and really want their contributions to stay in the way that they contributed. And then that's where some friction pops up. And then that's where the conflict resolution article is tested, right? It's always the first test of that article. The first test of that article is a really good indicator of whether or not the family is actually going to make it, right? But the individual members of the family that are supposed to be focused in some way on generational wealth have to understand the concepts by which capital is passed on, and which capitals are the most important. Monetary capital is the least important. All right, it's the easiest thing that you can do in your generational wealth plan. Money is not a difficult part of generational wealth at all, right? So that's the capital that people don't even think about. All right, the capital that's more important is social capital. All right, symbolic capital. Okay, those two forms of capital are particularly important. And habitus is a concept that was pioneered by French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. Pierre Bourdieu studied old money, new money, high society, and class in general. Right, that was his area of expertise, and he broke it down as a sociologist to try and figure out what the differences were and why it was important, and so on and so forth. Habitus is the way in which you raise your children, the environment you raise them in. And it's the nurture side of what gives them a blueprint as to what is right and what is wrong, what is normal and what is abnormal, etc., etc. When that's intentional, it is a form of cultural currency that is immediately identified by individuals who have been bred to lead, essentially, right? There's a difference in the upbringing between those individuals and how that presents itself to the world, which is typically at its lowest level. It presents itself as confidence, which can be received as entitlement by some, right? Which is fine. The difference is The real confidence comes from actual competence and actually getting things done, right? So you would need to have experiences and social proof that you can actually do the things you say you can do and you've achieved the things you said that you will achieve in order to get real confidence. Entitlement, in truth, is thinking that you deserve things that you haven't actually worked for, that you haven't actually achieved, right? However, people who have achieved nothing can't tell the difference, right? So there's always going to be people who think that confidence is entitlement because they don't have a base by which to actually judge things against. Habitus is the intentional structuring of a safe place to create dispositions that grant children an advantage in life. All right, what does that mean? How does it work? What does it look like? Somebody had asked me the other day about it, and I gave an example of kids asking questions about schoolwork, or kids asking questions about food, or kids asking questions in general. Number one, confidence is a prerequisite for question asking, right? The safer a child feels, the more confident they feel in their space, the more questions they ask, including annoying repetitive ones. It is what it is, right? So so that's number one. That's almost an indicator that you're moving down the right road. The issue becomes that habitus, while while it can be formed intentionally, it can be destroyed unintentionally and almost subconsciously. All right. So going back to that example that was made the other day when it came up, you can have two kids that ask exactly the same question, and you can have two parents that love their kids, and the way the parents answer the question will affect the habitus of the child. So while you're sitting over there building generational wealth financially, you're destroying the generational wealth socially, intellectually, by way of confidence that that child is going to have in the future, right? So what does that look like? Here, you got two kids sit down for dinner. One in house A, one in house B. These kids are cognitively identical, right? Kid in house A says, why do I have to eat Brussels sprouts? Mom in house A says, you'll eat what I tell you to eat. I put it in front of I put it in your plate. You're going to clean your plate or you're not going to eat nothing tonight. Okay. Kid in house B, mom says, what do you think Brussels sprouts do for your body? And a dialogue begins as to what Brussels sprouts might do, what their nutritional context are. Is it a simple protein? Is it a complex protein? When you add it to whatever else is on the plate, why do we eat it? Why do we not eat it? Right? Kids are identical. Both parents love their kids. Right? No one is purposely trying to do anything crazy to their kids. One kid learns that their questions don't matter, or that they don't have the right to get an answer to their questions, and they should just do what they're told, which is great. If that kid's destiny is to be a factory worker, clock in, do whatever it is you're told. The other kid learned that their questions do matter, and that there are reasons for doing things, and if they investigate those reasons, they can gain a deeper understanding. Okay? Now, we fast forward. Both kids end up in the same school in the same class. Okay? Kid from house A knows that, the teacher's going to tell them what to do and is going to order whatever homework they need from them, and they're going to do it. And if they don't understand something, maybe it's because they're dumb, and they should keep their head down before the teacher exposes that they're dumb, and maybe look on someone else's paper until they figure it out. Kid B has already had the habitus that education happens as a system that they are part of, and that system is there to benefit them. So Kid B raises hands, challenges the assertions of the teacher in a respectful way, right? And has dialogue investigating whatever educational knowledge or background they're seeking from the teacher in that interaction. Now, the teacher starts forming ideas about the students in the class. Again, child A and child B are cognitively identical. But all of a sudden, child A isn't really taking education seriously. They're staring out the window. They're not asking questions. Their homework is wrong, and they never ask any questions about it. They're not approaching the teacher for tutoring, anything like that. Child B, on the other hand, starts getting more attention from the teacher, is engaging, respectful, always is raising their hand, always is, questioning something about the education process in a respectful way. That leads to a greater outcome in the class, right? Again, the kids are identical. It's the habitus that's now showing itself in this classroom. So Kid B now has an academic disposition, and Kid A doesn't really have an academic disposition. They actually have a concentration disposition, right? Which, again, is great if they're going to be a factory worker. That's outstanding. They're going to do exactly what their manager says. They're going to keep their mouths shut. They're going to punch the clock, and they're going to make the car bumper or whatever it is they're making. No problem. That's fine. However, it doesn't typically work for generational wealth families. That's not typically an activity that's going to maintain the dynastatic wealth. So they need a different disposition towards, life that's going to give them the tools to access, greater forms of wealth. Yes, but it's not really about that at that point. It's more about greater forms of social acceptance and social experiences is what it ends up boiling down to. Because the wealth should be handled by you, right? You should have made the moves necessary to handle the wealth, and that should all be built into the trustee. So the money stops being important at a certain point. And if there's no money, then what's left, right? Then what is important? Who's the doctor? Pierre Bourdieu. There's James Coleman as well. He's an American sociologist, and he's actually, in a way, the antithesis of Bourdieu. So if you want to kind of see an opposite viewpoint, but some of the differences are academic. Because these weren't all theories. A lot of these were longitudinal studies. So some of the differences is just academic. Well, yeah, so in the household it's intentional, but it only needs to be intentional for one generation. After that, it's just habit. That's why it's up to the framer. The person who creates the generational wealth in the first generation is the one making the most sacrifices. and applying the most discipline, because it's really, really easy to just do the wrong thing in the presence of the next generation and not even realize that they're watching you, right? Anyone who's been a parent, and when they drop something, they use a vulgarity, they say shit, they drop something on the floor, and they've just become a parent a year ago, and all of a sudden they drop something on the floor, and the baby says shit before they can say shit, and then they're like, fuck, the baby's listening to me, right? So anyone who's been a parent understands that that's how it goes. So it becomes a matter of disciplining yourself, which everyone struggles with. That's why it's so valuable, and that's why so many people, dislike doing it, because any form of discipline, whether it's weight discipline, whether it's business discipline, whether it's mindset discipline, any form of discipline is incredibly difficult, and may even be a lifelong, endeavor. It's not just a 30-day thing where you make a new habit, right? It may be that you're working on it, for the rest of your life. But for that next generation who gains it through habitus, it's not the same. For them, it's just the normal way that things are. Well, it becomes an internal map that tells you how to act, how to fit in, all of that. And it's all based on the environment and where you grew up, right? So there's nature too. We're just not talking about that right now. Right now, we're just talking about nurture. But it all stems from the environment you grew up in. And there are certain things that can hack that, right? Um, Classical ratios of music. It does not have to be European classical music, but it has to have the same golden ratio. A ratio that tells your brain it's okay to calm down and think, right? No, Mozart does not have the patent on that. There's music from all different types of cultures. There's Japanese, music, Chinese music, African music. There's music from all types of cultures that inspire the same type of quietus in the mind, and ability to think and be creative and come up with new ideas and so on and so forth, right? A lot of people will, default to Bach and Brahms and Mozart and those composers as though they're the only ones who composed anything that was classical. That is not true. But, um, you know, Megan Thee Stallion does not make that list, right? So what you have in the environment, what you presented um, to those children during those formative years, is going to be part of the generational wealth plan. It's part of how you pass on generational wealth, generational wealth that lasts, especially, right? You don't want to be part of the 75% that goes broke in one generation. And these things, the things that no one talks about, are the things that cause that 75% to go broke, right? It's not the money, because all 75% of them folks had the money. That's how they lose it in one generation. It's not the money. The money is the easiest part of this. Easiest part of this. Habit just becomes natural, which is why you only have to discipline it for one generation. It becomes a feel, right? It becomes a feel for the game. So if you're in a house that that transmits social capital, and among that they transmit cultural capital and dispositions to each other, and among those dispositions is habitus, you'll notice that a lot of things happen in that house without anyone saying a word, because they have a feel for it, right? Once habitus is transmitted, you get a feel for what needs to happen next. and you understand your place essentially in the order of things, right? Very similar to, parents who are like, I give my kid a look and they know better, right? Now, what kind of disposition that creates is a story for another day, but that's the kind of natural effect that the transmission of habitus has on the household, right? A very subtle gesture can clear a room. Everybody can pick up on, what's going on, and that room can be cleared. And then outsiders would be questioning, where's everybody going? What's happening? What's going on? Because they don't have the habitus. They don't have the feel of the game, right? So you're still trying to figure out, why is everybody moving? Where are we going? What happened? Da, 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 because you don't have that natural transmission of habitus within that cultural aspect, right? So habitus isn't positive or negative. It just is what it is, and it is what's transmitted. So you can see on the far opposite end of the spectrum, the same thing happens, right? When you're dealing with, street gangs and criminal organizations and all of that, same thing happens. They'll make a move, everybody get up and get out of there. And if you're not part of that, and you just happen to be in the same room, you be asking the same questions. Where's everybody going? What's going on? Right? But those people from, that culture know the whole room's about to get shot up. Time to go. You didn't even pick up on it because that habitus was not conveyed to you. So it works around. This is not some highfalutin old money, old guard type of situation where only the rich people. No, it's just, how do you cultivate it? What exactly is it that you're passing on? What exactly is it that you're making natural for the next generation? Is it something positive or is it something negative? Does it grant the tools for success, or does it set people up for failure? Don't say the quiet part out loud. But you're right. It does. It does. So when you see the natural intonations, it does say something about the upbringing, unfortunately. No, because you're not born with it. You absorb it. You absorb it from the people around you. Because it's the formative time. So you're like a sponge soaking it all up. So you absorb it from the people around you. It's autopilot. That's why it's so hard to fake. Because if you're forcing that's visible immediately. Everyone can tell that you're forcing it. That's also why, okay, the school that I went to had 5,000 people in one school, right? It was actually like a record that it held. The most people in one building east of the Mississippi, right? So 5,000 people in one school. If you were new to this school, every student noticed it immediately. Now, how does that happen in a school of 5,000 people? You all have had this experience if you haven't been homeschooled your entire life. This is not a unique experience, right? So how did that happen? If you got all these, even if you had a school that only had 100 people, whatever, everybody instantaneously knew who transferred in, who was not from there. Why? Right? Because their habitus was different. And even them trying to fit in, them forcing it was obvious, glaringly obvious to everybody who was part of that natural environment. Everybody who came from that place, right? It's the same reason why, black folks will come to Africa. Well, they'll come here to Kenya and think nobody can tell that they're not from here. Everybody knows immediately. As soon as you step off the plane, it's glaringly obvious that whether or not your skin color is the same, you're not local, right? Because your habitus is different. Now those are your broader habitus, your general habitus, right? But your dispositions towards different things are the focuses that were intentionally set up by those stewards who were making sure that you had what you needed to maintain your generational wealth. It's not an easy, simple thing. Y'all think it's about some money. Y'all think it's about some having a couple dollar signs in the bank. It's not about that. It's way, way, way deeper than that. And that's why stewardship is what sets apart those families that have a dynasty that lasts forever, and those families that crumble into dust. Right. So the first disposition that you're going to see play out that gives your kids a leg up is going to be academic disposition or academic habitus. The way the way educators are going to treat your kids, it's absurd. Though the relationship that you will have with the educators as a result of that, again, absurd, especially if you're the first generation. Moving forward, they're just going to think that that's how people engage with educators. But if you're the first generation of this, looking back on, what you went through, it's going to blow your mind. Well, you got kids in sports. Okay. How do you know who the best player is? Does the coach give them more time? Does the coach invite them to the summer camps? Right. So is the coach doing something wrong then? Does the coach even think they're offering favoritism because that player earned that position, right? Your son's the best on the football team. He's supposed to go to summer camp, ain't he? Uh-huh. So when it's you, it's a different thing. It's not even conscious for the educator. They're just leaning into the kid who wants to learn. The issue is that the kid who hasn't been socialized with an academic disposition doesn't necessarily not want to learn. He just doesn't think he has the right to engage. That's the real difference. And sometimes those dispositions are beat into them, for lack of a better word, but beat into them overtly, and sometimes it's covertly, right? Sometimes it's grown folks is talking. Don't talk when grown folks is talking. Oh, okay. Well, teachers are grown folks, so I'm gonna shut up. I'm not gonna ask no questions, right? Sometimes it's that. So that's overt, where they're literally being told to shut up and make themselves smaller. Well, then that's what they're going to do, right? So don't be mad when they're not the doctor that you wanted them to be. They need to be small. You told them to, right? Sometimes it's more covert, right? Sometimes I'm gonna just do it. Just do it because I told you to do it. I'm tired. I work 2 jobs. I don't have time to tell you why the sky is blue. It's just blue. Eat your food. Oh, my questions don't matter. Maybe I should stop asking them. Right? That wasn't the intention. They were tired. They worked 2 full-time jobs and a part-time job. They didn't want to sit down and start talking about light refracting on water particles and making the sky blue. Maybe they didn't even know. Right? So the intention wasn't there to actually diminish that, member of the household. But intention or not, that's possibly what happened. So sometimes it's overt and sometimes it's covert. What about peer pressure? Well, there are no peer pressure results at this point in time. See, this all happens by the age of like 6. Some would even say by the age of 4. All right. So by the time the peers show up, they already have the autopilot. Right? So their clicks are almost designed based on the habitus. Like I can clearly remember in elementary school, the clique of people who aren't even alive anymore, like the clique of people who ended up being killed in gang violence, they were already little gangsters in elementary school. I can clearly remember each and every clique. The clique of people who, had an academic disposition, even though I didn't realize it at the time, and were asking questions and sitting in the front row of class and didn't care. Those, if they were called teacher's pet or all of that, they didn't care, right? And so all of that started at home, right? Because now in elementary school, we're talking about first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. They were already, clicked up. Whether they were clicked up or not, they already had a disposition to their clique. The jocks were already jocks. The gangbangers were already gangbangers. The nerds were already nerds. I can very, very, very clearly, look back at my elementary, and I would assume most of you can as well. Clearly look back at your elementary experience, and everybody was already what they were going to be. So it's, the peer pressure thing is almost a cop out because the peer pressure comes after you've already set, that child up for success or failure. Is there intervention? Sure. Yeah, sure. You can come in and intervene. It's just harder. Yeah, it's just harder. It's almost like if you believe in, I don't know, vegetarianism. And so your kids are vegetarians from birth or vegans or whatever, right? It's way easier to maintain that veganism than it is for them to be omnivores from birth, and then at 10 years old you intervene and you say, okay, now we're going to be vegans. Right? They remember what a cheeseburger tastes like, so now it becomes discipline instead of natural, and discipline is always harder. So is there intervention? Sure, you can intervene, but you're making the work harder than it needs to be. Now if you didn't know no better up until the intervention part, then that's what you got to do. You got to, do your damnedest to make sure that you course correct, and you set your family up for the generational wealth. That's what it's about. So it's about the family. So if the family's not going to maintain it, then fuck it, YOLO. You know what I mean? Go do what you want to do. But if it's about the family and you want to keep the family going, then you want to make sure that those things are in place in advance. Oh yeah, 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 all the time, all the time. One of my habits is language. Very, very similar. Gary Vee said something and it was hilarious because it's very, very similar to the way that I was, internalized towards whether or not swearing mattered, right? And so I'll cuss all the time, but I have to discipline myself around my son to make sure that he doesn't hear certain things now. So now it's harder on me, right? So my father made it harder on me by having, same thing with Gary Vee. He sits up there. I'd rather my daughter say fuck instead of He had this whole interview on it, right? And he may think that for now, but moving forward, he's just going to make it more difficult, for them to move around in certain societies and certain cultures, right? And which may or may not matter, may or may not matter. They may never move in those circles, and then that's fine. That might never be part of their destiny, and then I suppose that's fine. But It definitely doesn't lean into any kind of academic disposition. Um, and so it doesn't assist them and aid them in academic achievement at all, right? So which ends up becoming the thing, right? If money is not a factor anymore, then what is? What builds your culture? What builds your class? What builds, the person, right? It's going to be academics. You even get to a place where what is it known as, where there's academic distancing. It's called academic distancing, and essentially it's knowledge for the sake of knowledge, right? um where there's not necessarily any utility to the knowledge. It's just an exercise in academics, right? So at some point that becomes almost a almost like a habit, or or not a habit, I'm sorry, a hobby, like art or like painting or like whatever. Academia can become a hobby at that point. So and you'll even see it, like you'll sometimes see it, like here on social media and stuff, where you'll flip through and there's a live going on, and someone is rattling off dates and times and places and people from 1288, about what happened in uh, Bunrathy Castle and the revolution, and that has absolutely no bearing and no utility on today whatsoever. To either prove a point or to flex, the intellectualism or whatever, right? And so it just becomes a hobby, like calligraphy or pottery or golf or anything else. It just becomes a hobby at that point. But the level of difficulty is apparent in the hobby, right? And the more difficult the thing is that you achieve, the greater confidence it bestows. So once money is not a problem, things like that start presenting themselves. You start having more PhDs in the family. You start having more, professional degrees. You may even start having more, liberal arts degrees that don't really, lead into any career field because that's not necessary, right? So these are the things that will end up happening as a result of generational wealth that may or may not need to be managed depending on how you see those things. The biggest part is awareness, being aware, that these paths exist, that you're probably going to travel down, or your descendants are probably going to travel down those paths, and then how are those leveraged to the greater good of the family. Yeah, sure. I mean, so excuse me. I don't know what's going on with my throat this morning. So I've seen members of families that they have a family art collection as part of one of their wealth strategies, and then it gets to the point where a member of the family is on the board of the Smithsonian and has like a PhD in art history. Well, what job are you going to get with a PhD in art history, right? But because they have generational wealth, because they have the family trust funds, because they're following their family constitutions, they don't have to worry about money. Money is not their concern. But they do worry about stewardship. Every legitimate dynastic family worries about stewardship. Any person that's telling you they came from some sort of trust family and they do not know what the word stewardship is, and they do not utilize the word stewardship, is lying to you, right? So that person has become the steward over the family art collection, right? And in such, and as such, has become an expert in the field and is now serving the Louvre or the Smithsonian or the whatever, right, in that capacity. These are not jobs that you see advertised in the newspaper. These are jobs that are passed around certain circles and certain societies. You don't have to cultivate that. That's natural. It will always benefit the family because the family constitution that the family grew up in has already instilled that essentially nothing matters more than family. So eventually, all members of the family will do things that benefit the family naturally. It won't be something that you'll have to talk about. Yes, 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 but we're just talking about habitus for now. There are plenty of other dispositions and other capitals that are utilized and sent back and forth. Um, Class is a social capital, right? Not class as in an economic class, but class within the family, right? So there are different types of class. Um, and so there will be things that may be vulgar to the family that aren't vulgar, to society as a whole. But their understanding of class and their understanding of taste are capitals. They're part of their social and cultural capital, right? Once you get past financial capital, the real capitals start to emerge and show themselves. And that's what's going to be what maintains the generational wealth. Yeah, well, Coleman saw class as public good, right? So whatever you did for the public good, that was your class social capital. Now, Bordeaux saw it a little bit differently. Yeah, definitely. I mean, read both. Nothing wrong with reading opposing views. And like I said, they're not necessarily opposing views. I think the opposition is in the source of what happens, not in actually what happens. Right. Well, there are going to be forms of all capital, right? So like social capital, there are about there are roughly three forms of social capital. Obligations and expectations are your first form of social capital, right? And so your word and your reputation are going to matter, right? And so that's why oaths and obligations are not entered into lightly. And so judgments are made, class judgments, not based on money, but based on social capital, right? So what class are you in the social hierarchy is going to be based on social capital. People who break obligations easily, that's a judgment that's going to be made by the family as to whether or not this person should be closer to the family. That's why divorces matter, because you said in good times and in bad times, in sickness and in health. And then the first time a bad time showed up, you broke your obligation, right? In certain, societies, that's highly frowned upon. Right? That's why at certain levels, people won't do business with people who are cheating on their spouse. If you can cheat on your spouse, who's supposed to be the closest person to you, why wouldn't you steal from your business partner? Why wouldn't you cheat on your business partner if you can cheat on your spouse? Right? So again, that becomes social capital. There are information channels, right? Sometimes referred to as social relations. And it's like a cost-free way to like acquire information, right? Because typically you have to pay for information, right? Generational wealth people understand this. They understand that they invest in intelligence and information that then gives them an edge and that they make a return on investment off of because they know that they will act, right? It goes back to obligations and expectations. Folks that are on a different class level, they'll gain information and not do anything. Like somebody had asked me before, why do you give all this away for free? Because 90% of the people listening just want to go, oh, and intellectually feel good and intellectually masturbate with me for an hour or two until they get off, and then they turn off their social media and never do a damn thing. Right? That's just a fact. Right? So I'm digging for the 10% that are actually going to do something, but the majority are not. Right? So that's why it doesn't matter that people write books. It doesn't matter that people have podcasts. It doesn't matter that people come do these lives. The vast majority of people are going to come up with an excuse. They're going to be lazy. They're not going to get it done. It just is what it is. Right? So your information channels aren't just channels of information. They're channels of information from people who actually do what they say they're going to do. Right? And then you have your norms and your effective sanctions. Excuse me. You have your norms and your effective sanctions, right? And so there's pro-social behavior, and there's behavior that's discouraged. Delinquency is always discouraged. Free riding is always discouraged. You know, and then your pro behavior might change depending on your cultural, your cultural capital, which is a different branch of capital. But depending on the culture you come from, your pro behavior might be different. There might be tiny things that other cultures don't understand at all, right? Like in China, we never gift anybody four of anything. 3 or 5, but never 4. Right? Because the word for in Chinese also sounds like the word for death. Right? So we don't do it. We never gift anybody a clock. It's bad luck. Right? It means your time is running out. Right? Now that's a cultural capital thing. The fact that we know that means we gained some cultural capital while living in China. Right? And it means that the social rung that we engaged with was at a certain level. There are certain things that we know about Chinese culture that would indicate which class of people we deal with when we're in China. That's the same for all cultures, right? So that's the same for all cultures. The things you know about those cultures and the traditions that you learned came from Habitus, right? When we went to those places and we lived in those places, we absorbed the social norms of those places that we had never encountered before. So there was still, area for growth, even as adults or whatever. So that came from a habitus grown out of that culture. Language can also do that, right? So in English, or American dialect of English, but in English in general, actually, I can knock something over by mistake, and then if you ask me what happened, I can say, I broke the vase. You can't do that in every language, because if it's a mistake, then you didn't break it, it broke. Right? So those of you who speak French, think about how you would say that in French. Think about how you would say that in Italian. You wouldn't say, I broke the vase. You would say, the vase broke, because it was an accident. Right? So even just in language, which is why you see certain, families and certain classes of families they are all learning certain languages, even if those languages are dead languages, because it's going to frame the way you think about the things that you engage with. Right? So somebody coming from a certain language wouldn't beat themselves up over mistakes because they take no ownership of an actual mistake, because there is no ownership to take. Right? Whereas our culture is incredibly litigious in the United States, because in our language we take ownership of things that were natural mistakes that had nothing to do with us, in the most part. So whereas other cultures are just like, all right, it was a mistake, whatever, and they move on, right? We sue people over mistakes, right? People here don't sue people over mistakes, right? So the language creates a basis of habitus as well. We were at breakfast yesterday. My son is 21 months old for now. In a couple weeks he'll be 22. And as you guys who've been following me know, we just came back from China about 2 months ago, whatever. So we're sitting at breakfast here in Kenya, and there's some Chinese people at the table next to us, and they're talking, and he must have picked up on something that they said, and he shot around right away, and started speaking Chinese to him. Not well. He doesn't even speak English well, but started speaking Chinese to him right away. And they were like, "What is this goo goo gaga that sounds Chinese?" And they were all very intent. And of course, he loved he loved the attention of it all. He's still doing that thing where, positive or negative, if he gets enough attention, he'll keep on doing it. But he thinks in three languages currently. So sometimes he'll speak Swahili, sometimes he speaks English, sometimes he speaks Chinese. Haven't heard him speak any Cantonese yet, but I speak to him in Cantonese. So he hears Cantonese and Mandarin, but he sometimes speaks Mandarin, he sometimes speaks Swahili, he sometimes speaks English. Hasn't spoken any Meru yet, which is his mother's traditional language. And he hasn't spoken any Cantonese yet. So we'll see. But by exposing him to those languages, we're changing the way he thinks about the concepts, because he's not translating. It's the worst way to learn a language. He's not translating things in his head because he doesn't have a full lexicon yet, right? There are even certain things that he only says in one language. Like, he doesn't say chicken. He only says kuku, which is the Swahili. He doesn't say G, which is the Chinese. He only says kuku. So there's certain things that he only, says in a certain language. So he only thinks of those things currently in that context, right? But that's part of the habitus that you push forward to your kids, is the ability to think about things in other languages, right? And think about things in other concepts. Sometimes even in masculine and feminine concepts, depending on what language it is, right? So if you're dealing with Italian or something like that, and you're thinking about things in a masculine and a feminine concept, mentally, that has an impact, on how you think about relationships and how you think about the masculine and the feminine in general, right? So these things have to be intentional. Because when your mind works through things, like, for example, sometimes I go to sleep and I dream in English. Sometimes I go to sleep and I dream in Chinese. And if my mind is working through things in Chinese, it works through it in a completely different way than if it's working through things in English, right? So when you are not translating things and you're actually learning a language the same way a child learns a language, and you understand the concept of the code, which is what all language is. It's a coded system of sounds, and if you know the code and you can decipher the code, then you can communicate in it, and if you don't know the code, then you can't, right? So and the code makes certain assumptions. Those assumptions have to exist for the language to work, right? So every time you think in a different language, you're thinking based on a different set of assumptions, right? And those sets of assumptions are going to dictate your worldview as expressed through that code. So if it's intentional, all right, then you can make sure that you cultivate an actual well-rounded academic disposition for that child just through language. All right. Now you guys see why I said that education is the hard part, right? That the money thing was easy. Putting a little bit of money away and letting it compound for generational wealth, that wasn't hard. That wasn't hard at all. It's this part. This is the hard part. Thank you, Dorsey. But yeah, this part is the hard part. And this is just one tiny little branch of capital. One tiny little branch of, well, we've crossed over from social capital to cultural capital. But two, two little branches of capital, right? There are more. We'll get into it over the year. Since this is our generational wealth year, we will definitely, get into it. What are the core principles? Well, that's a good question, Cynthia. But your family is going to have its core principles. Now, are there overarching core principles? Yes. Rational action is one of them, right? Rational action is a core principle. If your actions are irrational, anyone with class is going to move away from you very, very quickly, right? So, rational actions, absolutely 100% core principle. Um, Social structure as capital, another core principle. Um, the gamification of closure is probably a core principle. Now I'm just working off of experience there, but that's probably a core principle as well. Game theory in general, the ability to understand that things are not a zero sum game, some things are not a zero sum game, and some things can be, and operating effectively in that understanding can definitely be a core principle. But there's very few like overarching. It's going to depend on the family, and that's going to be something that really relates to your family constitution more than anything else. Well, there's Pierre Bourdieu. You can read. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, how do I learn more? There's Pierre Bourdieu for sure. He was a French sociologist who really kind of pioneered work in this space. There's the American James Coleman, so you can read him as well. And he was kind of in like an opposing viewpoint to a certain extent. Hmm, 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 hmm. Uh, there's Robert Putnam. Robert Putnam's work is there as well. He had what's it called? Bowling Alone. It's like his famous work. So you can definitely look into him. Hmm, 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 hmm. I'm trying to remember what the guy's name is. There is a book. Mm, an invitation to reflexive sociology, like 1991, 1992. There's a co-author named Waquant. He's pretty good. I hope you're writing this down. You put me on the spot, and I'm trying to remember things that I've read 20 years ago. um, hmm, 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 hmm. Yeah, I can't think of anybody else at the moment. But yeah, I guess that's a good place to start. right? So start by reading them, I suppose. Yeah, well, a lot of people are kind of focused on economic capital, which loses its luster very quickly. Social capital ends up being the capital you use the most externally. Cultural capital ends up being the capital you use the most internally, right? So, in your household, in your family, as your family expands, as the generational wealth expands, um, you'll be talking about cultural capital internally between family members, and whether it's verbalized or not. That's the capital that you're going to, trade in, inside the family. And your social capital is going to be the capital that you're going to trade in with similar families to yours. Economic capital is what you're going to use for the world, but that's not going to necessarily be a huge sticking point for you. Oh yeah, definitely, Dorsey. Yeah, have a good one. Thanks for hanging out. Well, linguistic competence is going to be a huge part of your cultural capital, right? So, if you're of the Gullah culture or the Geechee culture, being able to speak Gullah or being able to speak Geechee, would be part of your linguistic competence, right? So that's going to be part of your cultural capital. Um, your familiarity with legitimate culture is also going to be part of your cultural capital, right? Um, and so you, and it's seen quite often in many a community, and it'll set you apart. Like for example, people will ask me things like, "Who you got for the Super Bowl?" I don't have anybody for the Super Bowl. The last Super Bowl I saw, the Washington Redskins won, and the quarterback was black, right? So that immediately lets them know that I'm not part of their class, right? Whereas the people that I talk to on a regular basis couldn't tell you which player was playing for what team. They couldn't even name the teams, right? Utter waste of time to them to be watching a bunch of guys run around playing a game instead of building a billion-dollar industry, right? So it's just a different class. Not one's not better than the other. It's just a different class, and they can recognize each other based on the familiarity with the legitimate culture of the class that they're in. And then the last one for cultural capital is academic dispositions, right? So that's going to be your manners. It's going to be your behaviors. That's going to be your self assurance with authority figures. That's going to be your ambition, your confidence, and it's going to be misidentified by educators as natural academic brilliance. But it's not. It was bought with the discipline of those individuals that came before you in the family. Yeah, yeah. Well, your social capital is largely going to be your network, right? It's largely going to be influential contacts and relationships that parents will typically leverage for their children, right? And so part of that becomes the Ivy League school you go to, not because you need to graduate from that school, but because you're going to meet certain people there that are going to expand your network in certain ways, right? So a lot of those decisions are not made for the reasons that outsiders think they're made for, and actually they're made and designed for social capital. Well, yeah, I mean, economic capital is there, but it might not be any of your business. Well, so like I'll give you an example. We just set up a family office for one of our older generational wealth clients, and that family office is set up out of Singapore. And so they're going to have one member of the family, a female member of the family, who's already been, set up for this, and she has an MBA and she has a DBA, so she has a doctorate in business administration. She has a CPA and an EA and a JD, so she was well groomed for this whole thing by the family. And then so she's going to sacrifice her citizenships in time. She doesn't qualify yet because we just set it up, but she's going to end up sacrificing her citizenships because they have a pretty healthy passport portfolio. Most of our generational wealth clients do. So they have citizenship to, like 13 different countries at this point. And so she's going to give all of that up and become a Singaporean citizen. So she gets all those benefits of having the family office based out of Singapore, right? So she's in charge of the economic capital. She's now going to essentially be the personal banker for the entire family, right? And so there's obviously some economic benefit to that. That as almost like payment for doing that. Give me one moment. All right. All right, sorry about that. So yeah, there's some economic benefit for her for doing that. We always recommend that you choose a female for that, not because females are inherently better at anything, but because there's a mandatory military service in Singapore, but it only applies to men. So if you send a guy over there to do that, and then you're going to have to lose their expertise managing your family's assets for I think it's 2 years while they go join the freaking army, the Singaporean army, right? And then what? Now who's managing, your family office? So we always recommend that it's a woman, and that way they're exempt from the military service. But you get all the extraordinary tax benefits and blah 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 blah. So, is there economic capital? Yeah, but it might not be any of your business. You just might not be part of the family that deals with the economic capital. Yeah, there's always a basic financial literacy for sure, and an advanced financial literacy, and that should be mandated by your trustee. But that doesn't mean that you manage the entire family's wealth. So your stuff might be your business, but the economic capital of the family is probably not your business. Yeah, well, so recognizing le- legitimacy in culture, like we had talked about before, is going to be another indicator. It's almost like the oath and obligations and all that, right? And so it's going to be another indicator of class. So there are certain institutions that, because of the legitimate creation of a course system, those are the only institutions that certain families will choose for certain degrees. For example, Harvard invented the MBA. The MBA didn't exist before Harvard invented it, right? So her DBA is from Harvard, the school that invented the MBA, right? But her law degree isn't from Harvard Law, right? So, and there are reasons for this. These things are done, for reasons. And those reasons are known to them, and it becomes part of their family culture, right? We go to this place because of this thing. If you're going to be this thing, right? We go to this school if you're going to be an engineer, a structural engineer. We go to this school if you're going to be, an artist. We go to this school if you're going to be a business person. right? And so there's an understanding that it's a matter of legitimacy, that we're going to the source of the thing in order to get the information that we want. Right, right. No, legitimacy matters. We were there was some post, can't remember if it was on my personal, no, I think it was on this account. There was some post about there was a kid talking about like coat of arms and stuff like that. And so there was some post about that. And on the post, you know, there was a response, and the response doesn't necessarily matter or whatever, but somebody popped up and they were like, "Oh, we just like made one up, right? Like we just designed a pretty little picture and called it our coat of arms and da 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 da." And so the issue becomes with that cultural capital of legitimacy is that while the person who thought it's morally or ethical or ethically appropriate to do something like that, the kids are going to suffer when they find out it's fake, when they find out it's a lie, right? It's going to diminish their confidence. It's going to have a negative effect on them because they're going to find out that the history they grew up with, maybe the things they were telling people, maybe the thing they got tattooed on them thinking it was their granted coat of arms is just some bullshit that grandpa drew and is calling a coat of arms. And, you know, now we're in a predicament where we're frauds, right? And so it's things like that. You want everything you do and everything you achieve to be legitimate, or else it has the opposite effect on the next generation. It removes confidence. It removes authority, you know, because it's all bullshit. So it's important that if you're going to be dealing in cultural capital, that you understand legitimacy, you know, and oaths and obligations to be a core tenet under cultural capital, and understand that down the road, especially with this internet, you know, age, down the road, the bullshit will be uncovered, and it's going to hurt your descendants. Like in National Treasure, like in National Treasure. Oh, right. The guy's family was connected to John Wilkes Booth. Right. And so the stain on that family with that false connection to the assassin of Abraham Lincoln, the modern day family members like lost some social capital because of that. Correct. Man, you threw me for a loop with that one. Did you just watch that movie yesterday or something? I had to think about that. But yes, that's exactly how it works. The descendants can lose confidence. They can lose social status. They can, you know, once it's found out that something was faked. Right, that whole movie was about proving that that wasn't true, wasn't it? Hmm. That's a good example. I have to go back and watch that movie again and get that example straight. That's a good example. Thanks for that. Yes. These are all hard concepts. These are all things that force people to look themselves in the mirror. We're never going to have live streams with 300 people up in here talking about this. When we start cussing and fighting and carrying on to have a Murray Povich show, then, you know, the numbers will go through the roof. But this is not about that. This is about accountability. This is about doing what's right for the next generation. This is about sacrifice. This is about discipline. So you're only going to have the 10% in here for these conversations. All right, so any questions on Habitus? Really, Habitus was the focus. We did drift a little bit, but Habitus is really the focus of this particular live. Any questions on that? Academic dispositions are part of Habitus. Habitus is part of cultural currency, and cultural currency is traded inside the family. All right. We got it. We get it. Any questions? Any questions on any of that? Which class is the best? There is no best class. It's just whatever class you fit into. You just get in where you fit in. There's no best class. There might be a richest class, but that doesn't make them the best. And if that's your goal, take a step back, right? Like if your goal is to join the winning team or like the best group, like take a step back. Design your family, craft your family, move from there, right? And this is what our family is going to be about. This is what we're going to do. This is our game, and this is how we are going to play it. We're not going to compete with any other family. We're not going to play any other family's game. This is the game we've chosen to play, period. Done. Right? That's where you want to be. You don't want to be, what's the best social circle? No. Create your own social circle. Because like we talked about earlier, same as, you being black and coming to Africa, everybody knows you're not from here. You can't chameleon your way in. It'll be obvious that you're not part of that group, especially for the first person. So don't worry about trying to fake your way into groups that you're not part of. Just build your own. It's actually way easier, quite frankly. What if you still want to join? Well, then you have to be of utility. If you still just have to join someone else's group, or there's some, whatever, some social class that you think, you should belong to, or whatever the case may be in that regard, then you have to be of utility. That's the only way that works, which is why it's harder, because there's no guarantee with utility. So you would have to be useful to the members of that group, and typically the requirement for membership in that group is more than usefulness. So you'd have to be useful until you figured out whatever the other requirements were. And then once you met the other requirements, maybe you would join, right? And then you would still be on almost like a second class citizen level in joining, and you might be stuck there. So, it truly is better to just develop your own group. But yes, there are methods of doing that. Again, kind of some of the ways that this has been illustrated, as far as like really taking the time to get into it, have been with criminal families, right? And so it's if you're trying to do that, you're almost trying to become a made man, right? So if you ever seen like The Godfather and all that, you're of utility to the family for years and years and years. You're doing all the dirty work, all of that stuff. And then after you're done with that, maybe they make you a made man. And if they make you a made man, now you're part of the family, but you're still you're not the son, you're not the cousin, right? Like now you're part of the family, but you're still like a second class citizen. It's the same in legitimate families, right? The family structure is the same. And those are the places where they kind of really showed how that works the most. So if that's your focus, I would never recommend it. But if that's your focus is to join someone else's family instead of build your own family, that might be what you're regulating yourself to. So just keep that in mind. Any other questions? Any other questions? All right, looks like we're good. I don't see anything else. I don't know how to build a family, so I feel like it'd be easier to join someone else. Well, no, that's where your professionals come in. That that do-it-yourself mentality, you got to throw that out. That that doesn't make sense. Um, and so that's where your experts come in. You're right. You'll never know. I'll give you a perfect example. Um, right before the holiday, which everything kind of closes down for the holiday, we did a trust for a client of ours. It's not really a generational wealth trust, right? But it's we did a trust for a client of ours. So that client has things going on in the United States. So we ended up having to send out a full breakdown of the options as we saw it here in this jurisdiction. To they have, I think they have an EAJD CPA, so a tax attorney, right? Not a just a public accountant. So we had to send out everything to them and then have them look at how the rest of that client's picture fit in to what we were doing and then come up with a solution. Their solution was drastically different than the solution of the person right before them. Right? So, and it was because their setup back home was drastically different than the person before them, right? So, all of that boils down into, in order to do it the right way and to gain access to the things that you don't know, that's the whole purpose of a professional, right? And then that professional is liable. That's the other purpose of the professionals. Like, yes, you don't know what you don't know, but if the person you hire also doesn't know it and doesn't admit that or bring another professional on board, then there may be some. They may be liable for that. They may have to pay for that, right? So that's the whole point of the professional. If you're trying to do it yourself, then what you have achieved is going to be the extent of what you can achieve. So take a look at that, right? If you're a multi-billionaire and you want to build generational wealth on your own and not engage anybody else, maybe, because what you've achieved is going to be the limit of what you can achieve. So if you've, built a multi-billion dollar empire from the ground up, then maybe you can, you know, replicate that in a family constitution and a family trust deed and so on and so forth. Still probably not, but at least you got a leg to stand on. At least there's some legitimacy that you can move forward with from there. But if you're the assistant manager at McDonald's talking about you're going to build a dynastic family with the no professionals by yourself, you might want to rethink that. What was the difference between the two? The major difference was that one does business out of LLCs, and the other had a C corp. And so, the one with the C corp was able to take a 10% ownership stake in their Kenyan company from the C corp, and then the other 90% of the Kenyan company was owned by their trust. And so that made them eligible for a foreign dividends received deduction of 100%. So they got a 100% tax deduction for all foreign dividends received. And so any of the money that they were moving from their Kenyan company to their U.S. company, that they received in the form of dividends, they received tax exempt. Right. Now the other person that you can only do a DRD or a foreign DRD, an FDRD, with a C corp. Can't do it with any other structure. So since the other one had an LLC and did not have a C corp election on the LLC, they had an S corp election on their LLC. Then that same strategy didn't make sense to them. Right, so two people doing exactly the same thing that have exactly the same Kenyan structure, so their overseas structure is exactly the same, have a completely different ownership structure in the United States. And then because of that, they have a different ownership structure in the ownership of their local companies as well. Right? So that's where your experts come into play. Because one of them, I mean, they don't know each other, but if they did, one of them could have talked to the other one and be like, oh, yeah, I get tax-free. Anytime I pull money out of the Kenyan company, it comes to me legally tax-free in America. Oh, okay, I'm going to do the same thing, but you can't. You don't have a C corp. Right? So it can be somebody that you trust who has done it before and has achieved certain results by doing it. And yet they don't exactly know how they did it because their expert did it for them. They just know that they legally don't have to pay taxes on it, and they're happy about that, but they don't exactly know how that worked. And here they are telling you about it, and you ain't got an expert. You're trying to do everything yourself, and you end up paying $250,000 fines to the IRS. Expertise. You don't know what you don't know. All right. Any other questions? Any other questions? All right. I think we're good. We will speak on another aspect of generational wealth tomorrow as we start our journey towards 100 new generational wealth trust funds this year for 100 different families. We are currently at 3. I think we're going to onboard another 1 or 2 today and tomorrow, but we are currently at 3. 3 of 100. Maybe I'll start putting that as like a banner so you guys can follow along with us on our road to 100 trust funds. All right, looks good to me. All right, guys, talk to you guys tomorrow. The Freedom Family will be here at the same time tomorrow and the same place. And if you have any questions, you can either DM them to me or ask them tomorrow when you see me. All right, talk to you guys later.